Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. I'm John Butthortz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And Washington Commentary columnist and American Enterprise Institute Director of Domestic Policy Studies, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
So we are in the totally unprecedented position, as we are constantly in the unprecedented position these days, of Donald Trump being to the right of Bibi Netanyahu on, if you want to call it the right, but being more determined and uncompromising on the issue of the release of hostages from Gaza than is the Israeli prime minister and his cabinet. Trump saying the other day that all 76 hostages had to be out by Saturday at noon or there would be hell to pay. And the Israeli cabinet meeting and Netanyahu coming out and saying, that's right, 9 hostages must be released by Saturday or there will be hell to pay. Trump said 76, Netanyahu said 9. I'm very much at a loss as to understand what Netanyahu's strategy is here. It is yet an important mark that people recognize, as Seth has written about extensively in the magazine, in both of his iterations as a writer, as a writer in the early 2010s, and then as he has returned since October 7th, as a very cautious, risk-averse person as a politician, not the raving lunatic madman that somehow seems to be the caricature of him, and that he has gone with the most cautious and prudent possible position he could take here that kind of splits a baby that I'm not sure anybody really wants to split. And Trump doubled down on it yesterday in this White House meeting with Elon Musk and his son on his shoulders and Stephen Miller standing over Musk's right shoulder, and double down on his idea of America taking Gaza, which he said we wouldn't pay for, but we would cherish and clasp to our bosom.
Well, that was after his meeting with the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
King Abdullah.
That's right. I'm mixing.
There's a lot of meetings.
A lot of meetings.
A lot happening.
A lot of meetings.
Most of it is televised.
And
so
also
it's easy to confuse. We're
also not going to know, it turns out, a lot of what's going on because they're not going to release the visitor logs from the White House they announced yesterday.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are going in and out of there from what we hear. The Oval Office is like like an all-day party. It's like the patio on Mar-a-Lago, only inside and not as large.
That's right. We used to have after Yom Kippur, after the fast, my grandparents used to have a big break fast, and over 100 people would come and go throughout the night. But they had one of those houses where the rooms just sort of all opened up into each other. That's what the Oval Office is like. It's like not everybody shows up at once, but through the course of an evening, there might be 100 people going in and out there.
Yeah, I mean, I heard last week about a meeting attended by a CEO of some, and he was sort of there, and then like Mark Zuckerberg walked in, somebody else walked in, then somebody else walked out, then Musk came in, then Susie Wiles came in, then she came out. Sort of these meetings are kind of rolling into each other. He's having conversations with 3 people on 3 different topics in the same kind of 25 square feet. Yes, a lot was going on yesterday. And that's the other thing, of course, is that he got the King of Jordan to agree to take 2,000 children from Gaza, which is interesting because he said, thank you very much. That's really lovely. And it's a really nice gesture you're making. And he kind of took it as an opening for more, and obviously Abdullah doesn't mean it as an opening for more. He means it to be the whole enchilada. It'll take 2,000 kids.
Yeah, I just want to say a lot of people have described that meeting as awkward, and I actually had the opposite feeling. At least in watching Trump, I was sort of stunned that he hadn't augmented this plan at all with Abdullah sitting right there. He was full steam ahead on this giant, ambitious, unlikely plan to relocate the entire population of Gaza and build it up. I mean, he was not at all deterred by anything that he has heard or any of the press or anything.
Can we just point out that as of today, Wednesday, February 12th, Trump's plan remains the only plan for post-war Gaza. It is absurd for the king of Jordan and for the Egyptians to say that the two-state solution will be implemented at the end of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. It's not going to happen. No one's going to do that. The idea that the Israelis and the Americans under Donald Trump would engage in this conflict with this psychopathic mass murder genocidal organization and then spend billions of dollars to rebuild the Gaza Strip so that that organization can then go back to its business of murder isn't self-psychopathic. And so I'm waiting. I'm waiting for someone to say, okay, President Trump, that's an interesting idea, moving the Gazans out and having the United States basically own the Gaza Strip / Riviera Casino beach properties. Why don't we do this? Why doesn't Egypt take over half of the Strip and then Jordan will take over the other half? Why won't the Saudis say, well, you know what, we can take some Gazans in and then maybe we'll spread them around the different populations? No one says anything. So until someone comes up with another idea, I'm sticking with Trump's, because clearly the two-state solution is dead and diseased, and there's no other alternative.
That goes to Abe's point, which is Trump didn't feel awkward. It only felt awkward if for some reason you were in some kind of bizarre sympathy with King Abdullah being put on the spot. I don't know why we should feel any sympathy for King Abdullah being put in the position of being a neighbor, part of the pan-Arab world, and a country that is itself 70% Palestinian. Why his comfort in the Oval Office and the potential confrontation with Trump should be a matter of any moment to any American. Trump is clearly comfortable with his plan. We can discuss whether or not that is rational. I would say he's probably hearing from a lot of people. He is not sitting around watching MSNBC or reading op-eds critical of this idea. He's probably got a lot of people coming in and going, it really is true. Massive population transfers take place in the wake of wars, took place after World War II. How many millions of Germans were moved out of the Sudetenland and various other places and returned to Germany after World War II
or
ended?
Maybe ask the Kuwaitis who kicked out all their Palestinians after the Gulf War. Right. So it's just happened to the Palestinians in recent times.
Right. So that's one thing. And then, of course, that then extends even more profoundly to President Sisi of Egypt, who literally, basically that refugee problem or the emptying out of Gaza could be solved literally in 2 days by him opening the gates, and letting people through. That is not an irrational and unrealistic idea. Egypt is a very large country with a very large population, largest population in the Middle East, could absorb this population of Gazans quite easily and also, by the way, quite remotely.
We would make sure that they absorb. That's the other thing here, is that whenever Trump proposes a plan, he proposes drowning people in money, right? I mean, his 2020 peace plan was like, here are going to be the borders, and we're going to give you $50 billion for development and stuff like that.
And he's got a savings right there from USAID. Just got to move it from the USAID.
Egypt is not going to have
transgender comic books and the condoms.
If Egypt agreed to what Trump wants, it will be cost free for them, is my point. In other words, it'll be much easier than it looks for people to comply with this plan, because Trump will make it so. But I think the mistake here is that they are, Trump is hearing from people well, it turns out that this happened and this happened and whatever. And he's not hearing, as Matt said, from the other side any sort of real engagement with it. And as I wrote last night on the blog, the Mahmoud Abbas just suggested that he's ready to go back to the table to discuss the Trump 2020 peace plan, right? How receptive do we think Trump is going to be to go back to 2020, right? The thing that Mahmoud Abbas realized is that in 2000 and then again in 2008, every time the Palestinians walked away from an offer, from a deal on the table without making a counteroffer, the subsequent offers for a while got better, right? It was ludicrous, but they would just be like, Clinton offered all this, and then Olmert came to him and said, all right, well, you can have this too.
Yeah, that's Ehud Olmert, who was the prime minister of Israel for 3 years, and after Arik Sharon had a stroke from 2005 to roughly 2009 or 2008. Anyway, he after rejecting peace, Olmert then sort of said, "Okay, here's a really nice deal." Now, I want to bring something up because it is something that Trump won't read. There are two op-eds in the New York Times this morning, one by our own contributing editor and friend Bret Stephens that says Hamas must be destroyed. Here are 3 practical ways in which Gaza can be ruled, including some elements of the Trump plan. Then there's Thomas Friedman. Now, in 2002, in September of 2002, Thomas Friedman, with great fanfare, wrote a column proposing a peace plan for the Middle East in the wake of 9/11. And he said the Saudis can recover their reputations if they would lead a peace plan in which, in return, in exchange for Israel returning to the 1967 borders and setting up a capital for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and giving the Palestinians candy and some cotton candy and a balloon. While the Palestinians were engaged in the Second Intifada, murdering hundreds of Israelis a month, that this was the way to go. And he then traveled to Saudi Arabia and saw the crown prince, now the infirm king, who said, "I can't believe it. It's as though you read the speech that is in my desk. I have written just exactly this plan in a speech. I am thunderstruck. I can't show you the speech, but this is what I am about to propose." And supposedly he was going to propose it on, I don't know, it was September 20th, 2002. And 2 days before that, Palestinian terrorists blew up the Ben Yehuda Mall in Jerusalem, both at the top and at the bottom. It's a pedestrian mall of about 4 blocks on a hill. And there was this very savage, very cleverly staged terrorist attack where, the ambulances show up, and then the second bomb goes off to blow up the ambulances, and then as the second bomb is going off, another bomb goes off elsewhere on the Ben Yehuda Mall. And as Wikipedia gently says, the proposal of the king was somewhat overshadowed by the terrorist event in Israel. Okay, I'm bringing this up because Thomas Friedman has a column today. This is Thomas Friedman's brilliant plan, which is that Israel should accept indefensible borders and give the Palestinians and the Saudis prizes for what was going on in the streets of Israel during the Second Intifada, after they had essentially agreed to that peace deal, the Clinton peace deal that Seth mentions. I can say with confidence, writes Friedman, that Trump's proposal is the single most idiotic and dangerous Middle East peace initiative ever put out by an American president. Still, I'm not sure what is more frightening, Trump's Gaza proposal, which seems to change by the day, or the speed with which his aides and cabinet members nodded their approval to the idea like a collection of bobble-headed dolls.
It's a great metaphor.
Who had the idiotic peace plan again? 22 years ago, 23 years ago? Who was that? Was that Trump or was that Thomas Friedman? Has Thomas Friedman done nothing?
Thomas Friedman has an idiotic peace plan right now.
Yes.
It's called the 2-state solution.
Yes.
That's
okay.
idiocy.
Yeah.
And if Kamala Harris were president right now, she'd be pursuing that, and we'd have fewer I don't know if we'd have any of the hostages who were released since January be released, and Iran would still be making mischief, and the Houthis would still be causing trouble. I mean, it's so. Why are we listening to him?
We're not, and
Right.
I think Trump isn't. I mean, again, Trump. The interesting aspect of the White House bubble is that, of course, we live in this atmosphere of constant outrage and rage at everything that Trump is doing. And Trump is, meanwhile, in a state of complete Tasmanian devil frenzy, having meetings, he's not reading, I mean, he's very conscious of what the press says about him, but he's got a 53% approval rating. People are telling him that what he's doing is fantastic. He's not paying attention to people not liking Elon Musk. He says Musk is doing great.
Right. The
He is not in
the poll the other day that had his approval rating high also said that like 70% of the public agreed with the statement that he was doing what he campaigned on. That was the key that they.
Right. So all of the stuff that we are dealing with as sort of outside thinkers and watchers and critics and all of that is this conversation in which the administration is not really participating except in the largest brush, which is to say they're like, yeah, you know what? Empty Gaza and we're going to rebuild it. How about them apples? And then Trump's like, yeah, I love this. I'm going for it. Tell me why I shouldn't, as Matt says. And no one is saying why he shouldn't. It's just like, you can't do that. And Trump would say, I suppose, well, you told me I couldn't come down the escalator and become president either.
I mean,
why am I listening to you?
The question he dodges, but I think there's a good answer for it. But the question he sort of dodges, it came up yesterday, is, well, why do you think the Palestinians want to leave? And he says, well, because you don't understand the beauty and the majesty of what we're going to build for them elsewhere, and the medical care and the this and that.
Yeah.
But why do you think they don't want to leave? That's the joke.
I mean, there's a horrible confusion here, and we're closing our March issue today. There was a remarkable piece in it by Elliot Abrams called "Gaza Shall Be Forsaken," which is a line from the prophet Zephaniah, and he makes the point that Gaza is a forsaken land. Period. It is not a Palestinian nationalist home. It is where Palestinians went in 1948 during the War of Independence. It was a place they landed as they were fleeing various places, and then got stuck there. And a refugee camp was opened for them. And almost 80 years later, that refugee camp is still there. It is called the Gaza Strip, and we have these fourth generation refugees. It is not a national homeland for the Palestinian people. They don't want to treat it as
I think this is important because I've heard several times in the media and in conversations with liberal dodos that Gaza that's sovereign territory. That's Palestinian sovereign territory. And I would just like to point out, no, it's not. It was part of the Palestinian Authority. But then after the elections in 2007, Hamas stole power, murdered everyone who opposed it, and has spent the last 15 years building a terror tunnel network in order to kill as many Jews as possible. And now, despite this conflict that's been going on since October 7th, 2023, they still hold hostages. They still hold Americans in those tunnels. The Palestinians in Gaza still support Hamas. And I'm supposed to come out at the other end of this conflict and say, you're right. That's sovereign territory. We should rebuild it. And then we should let the Palestinians there determine who their leaders would be. Again, that's insane.
It is not, and legally, internationally, it is not sovereign.
It's not sovereign territory.
It is a very peculiar legal construct. Israel took it in a war. The world did not recognize Israel's sovereignty over it in the form of UN resolutions. Israel had it left it self-administered to some degree, and also administered it, and gave aid, and the Egyptians gave it, whatever. And then Ariel Sharon said, "We're done. We're done with this. This is a lot. We shouldn't have gone in. In fact, as I've mentioned before, in 1967, during the Six-Day War, when the fastest route to cutting off and killing the Egyptian army was for Israel to go through Gaza, there was a fight within the war cabinet about whether to do it, because it meant, if they were successful, that Israel would then occupy Gaza, and nobody wanted to occupy Gaza because there was nothing there.
And we
At
should
least
point out, we should point out also real quick just what happened before that. There was no Palestinian sovereignty before that. Before Israel went into Gaza, right? It was there was the British mandate of Palestine that was under British authority, and then the Arab countries rejected the partition, and there was a Jewish state founded, and the Arab countries launched a war on Israel, and Egypt took some area, and Jordan took control of other area. There was no point at which it had been made Palestinian, whatever it means to be Palestinian sovereignty. It never started that way. Even before 67.
There was no Palestinian sovereignty.
Right.
There was an armistice in 1949. Armistice lines were drawn. When the armistice lines were drawn and the war ended, Egypt had control of Gaza, and Jordan had control of the West Bank, and the East Bank of the Jordan River, and half of Jerusalem. And it was in 1967 that Israel took the entirety of the West Bank and ended up with Gaza, which it didn't want, because that was tactically what they needed to do in order to win the war as quickly and as brilliantly as they did. And then when the war was over, they said to Egypt, okay, you can have Gaza back now. And Egypt was like, we don't want Gaza. We're not taking Gaza back. Thanks very much. The three no's: no state, no negotiation, no nothing. And Gaza has been in this nether region ever since. Egypt didn't have the right to Gaza. The partition plan that you're talking about of 1947, which is the only sort of legal document granting anybody any kind of international law standing, would have given the Palestinians Gaza. They rejected it. The Arab states rejected it. It sat there for these years in this totally indeterminate state. And Israel just said, we're washing our hands of it. You deal with it. We're done. We're going to make it Judenrein. We're pulling all the Jews out who live there and their settlements, and we're not going to have any troops there. And good luck to you, because this is too costly for us to administer. You hate us. We hate you. This settlement plan we have there is stupid. It takes too many Israeli soldiers to protect too few Jewish citizens, settlers in Gaza. That's not fair. It's not fair to the soldiers' families. We're pulling out. And this is what they've done with it.
And Jordan,
where it is now is what the Palestinians have done with their right over Gaza, which is not, as I said, is only granted sort of solely unilaterally by an Israeli pullout from territory they occupied in a war.
I have one other
one quickly, just the stat that people should keep in mind is that Jordan renounced its claim to the West Bank in 1988.
Right.
So until 1988, there was a question as to whether Jordan was going to, still have claim over that land. That's how recent it's been.
I have one other complaint today. This is my complaint day. My other complaint is that I'm reading in the New York Times about the meeting between the president and the king, and they go into the status of the ceasefire agreement. And they mention that Hamas, after the outrage at the condition of the hostages Hamas released last Saturday, decided to indefinitely pause any hostage release. And that's what set up this dynamic we spoke about at the top of the show, where Trump demanded that all the hostages be released by noon Saturday. And Bibi comes out and says, I guess 9 hostages. But in the coverage in the New York Times, they follow this description of events with, the really damaging information that Israel has yet to provide the Hamas with some tents. that they promised. So I guess that's the equivalent of torturing and starving human
all in
beings that you
Colombia.
illegally kidnapped and held in prison for months. But where are my tents? The moral equivalence and complete lack of proportion in the way that people are dealing with this conflict as we reach another impasse is, really getting under my skin.
Yeah, I mean the
If
headline
they
on the New
need
York
tents,
Times.
I can tell them where they can get tents. By the way,
Yeah,
if the Palestinians need tents,
there's a tent shortage because of the encampment. Coleman pop-up tents, really nice. They cost about $250. I have one. I mean, we get right off the shelf, but it's hard to
Maybe
get.
you should have thought about the tents before you attacked Israel and started the war that had led to all the buildings being demolished. Let's rewind the clock a little bit and think through this a little.
Let us talk about the headline on the New York Times website right now. Middle East, in this section called Middle East Tensions. Gaza ceasefire imperiled as Netanyahu threatens to resume, quote, intense fighting, right. Unquote. Not Gaza ceasefire imperiled as Hamas suspends hostage transfer. It's because Bibi is threatening to resume intense fighting. As I said at the top of the show, Bibi is taking a relatively passive position here. He is not the one who is threatening to unleash hell. He is saying we'll have intense fighting if we don't get 9 hostages back. the unleash hell or 76 hostages or unleash hell is Trump's rhetoric, not Israel's rhetoric. But what difference does it make? Abe, Tom Friedman, we must take him seriously because, as we know, there's a real problem, I think, with Tom Friedman now because he's lost. Used to go and talk to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and all of that. And Abe, you noted that his greatest sources are now being denied to him by technological change.
Well, he always got the feel of what was going on the ground and among the people by talking to the cab drivers, as he never failed to mention in his columns. And then I noticed a few weeks ago that he said when he goes to, I think, L.A. or San Francisco or something, he always takes the robot cabs now. So as Seth said, he's still talking, but
to no one.
Yeah, but to no one.
Yeah.
Which is what he's doing in his column.
Yeah. So now we don't even have the man on the invaluable guidance of the man on the street that made Thomas Friedman's column so uniquely sensible and grounded.
The headline you talk about how the ceasefire imperiled because of Bibi. In a sense, Bibi and Trump are on the same page in that neither one is listening to the Western press, to that source of criticism anymore. I mean, Bibi stopped a while ago. Once it was clear that the Biden administration was, tying his one arm behind his back, and Trump's in the same camp. So who are they yelling at? They're just riling up their readership.
Well, they're protesting, and it's like a protest that I want to point out a big story last night released by the Washington Post. Now, if we're doing sort of press criticism, even though I wrote this piece about how the media don't matter anymore, and you're basically saying the media don't matter, and they don't, in the sense that I don't think they are affecting Trump's view of how to proceed one whit in a way that he was very
but they do affect Democrats.
Right. It does affect Democrats, and that's important. I don't mean to belittle that at all. But a story by Paul Lamothe in the Washington Post that revealed that the Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth in Germany, among other things, going out and sort of doing daily exercises with the troops, probably the first defense secretary ever to do such a thing.
Can I preface
yes,
before you tell the story? Yeah. I want to preface it just by saying how I reached the story that you can then tell, and that's because in my preparation for the show, I'm reading the newsletters, and one of the newsletters is Playbook, which is now written by this British journalist who is I'm not sure he's been to America before, but he's very into reminding his readers that he is British. He says, well, Pete Hegseth is now going to the Munich Security Conference this weekend. I hope he gets a better reception than he did at the base in West Germany. And I said to myself, well, that's a little bit odd. I saw these great photos of him, working out with the Green Berets in the morning, and it seemed like everybody was having a good time. What could they be talking about? So I clicked the link, and I was then brought to the story that you are about to tell.
So there is the Defense Department runs schools all over the world where there are large deployments of Americans who might have their families with them. And Stuttgart, Germany is one of the places that the Defense Department has schools. And one school is called Patch, the Patch Middle School. And we are informed by Dan Lamothe that dozens of American students at a U.S. military installation in Germany walked out of their middle school on Tuesday as part of protests aimed at an official visit by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, underscoring the scope of delusionment with the Trump administration's crackdown on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. How do we know that it's about the disillusionment with that? Because Lamothe interviewed the leader of the protest, a 12-year-old girl, and her mother, who remain anonymous for fear of retaliation by fans of Trump. Now, I then did a little work, if I could just say. The story says that the Department of Defense Education Activity, which is the name for the governing body of its schools, oversees about 67,000 students worldwide. But it doesn't say how many students are at the Patch School. So I had to go and hunt down the number of students at the Patch School, which it turns out is 682. So let's say dozens of students. Lamothe kindly does not tell us whether that's 2 dozen or 3 dozen, but let's assume
or 13.
Okay. So I'm gonna say it's 24. Okay,
that's generous.
So that's
sure.
2 dozen. Okay,
yeah.
There are 682 students at the Patch Middle School in Stuttgart, Germany,
right?
Or 2%. The walkout of 12-year-olds because they don't like the suspension of DEI was 2%. This is a major story.
The high school walkouts are ridiculous enough, and in some cases objectively anti-Semitic. That when they occurred during the opening stages of the war in Gaza. But if you have to trumpet a middle school walkout, you're really reaching. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it is, I think, one of these moments when you're like, okay, look, it's very obvious. No one is getting a break. No one in the mainstream media is going to do anything but look for junk, trash stories. If they don't have good ones, they're going to go for junk, trash stories, character assassinating people in the Trump administration to the extent that they can. And I don't know for a fact. I am now going to state my opinion that I am sure is absolutely true, having spent many decades working around newsrooms, that the reason that Mr. Lamothe knows about this story is that he knows the mother, or an editor at the Washington Post knows the mother, and that the mother called to say, my daughter did a walkout. Do you think this is a good story? And he's like, ooh, that's so good. Give me all the details. I'll keep you, don't worry. I won't put your name in the paper. Otherwise, how would they know? 24 kids walk out of a 6. No one's going to issue a press release at the base, right? No one in Stuttgart. And as Matt says, like Hegseth had a kind of PR triumph. He had this morning.
Yeah.
There's this amazing picture of him sort of like fit doing this exercise. And there are these like 2 giant bruisers.
Berets. Green Berets. Yeah.
Green Berets. But I mean, they look like
Hulks.
Jaws. Yeah, the Hulk, like a combination of Jaws from the James Bond movies and the Hulk.
Right looks like AI.
Yeah. Really? And so this is like, that's pretty cool.
Bad day according to Politico.
Yeah.
Horrible day. horrible day because 12 kids walked out of a middle school protesting in favor of DEI in the military.
By the way,
this is what Trump has done. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
His opponents are defending trans people in women's sports and bathrooms, DEI in the military, the bureaucracy, USAID. It's incredible. What is the Democratic Party standing for now that actually has, I don't know, more than 35% support among the American public? I can't think of a single thing.
Yeah.
So the middle school walkout in Germany is
the middle school walkout in Germany
is the state of the resistance.
It really is.
That's the resistance now.
It is. It is.
You went from the
juice box to resistance.
Literally the juice box mafia.
Yes.
I mean, I know juice boxes are really for younger kids, but let's face it, who doesn't like a good juice box? They're great for 12-year-olds also. They don't spill.
It's the Episcopalian bishop and 13 middle schoolers.
And I mean, the funny part is, of course, there's resistance. Of course, tens of millions, if not 100 million Americans are, look, he has a 53% approval rating. He has a 47% disapproval rating. That's a lot of people. I just don't think that what they're disapproving is what the press wants you to think that they're disapproving of. What they're disapproving of is it looks like chaos again. He's like all over the map. I'm liberal, so I don't like what he's doing in general, and I don't really have specifics.
And look, we just got an inflation read as we were recording this, and inflation was at 3% in January, which was higher than expected. Now, that's not Trump's fault, or even it didn't even happen under Trump as president. He was president for 10 days in January, right? So 2/3 of the month went to Biden. But still, this is a big problem for him. If inflation still continues to persist, then Americans will be disappointed. It's not really a problem for Trump. He won, and he's term limited, but it's a problem for the Republicans and whoever wants to succeed Trump.
Right. And remember, what I mean, this is the thing that people, we've said it, and people really do need to keep it in mind. Like, they are doing in their own way, despite the way the mainstream media are covering this, like a fantastic PR job. They are just flooding the zone with stories, initiatives, executive orders, successful cabinet nominations, great, spectacular sort of like coups, like the release of this teacher, Matthew Fogel, who has been 6 years in a Russian prison and who stood there with Trump next to him and said, "You're a hero. I'm not a hero. This man is a hero. Steve Witkoff, who did the negotiating for me, is a hero. I can't tell you what it has meant to me, and to know that everybody in the country has been pulling for me," which like was really true, because like Biden did a fantastic bang up job of trying to get him out. Biden spent all of his capital on Brittany Griner, which I'm not saying, shouldn't have negotiated for Brittany Griner's release, but not then insisting on Fogel, who said in the course of this press conference, and should stick in Trump's mind about his positive feelings about Putin, that he was spent more than 100 days in hospitals where he received hundreds of injections. He doesn't say what the injections were. But I mean, he said that he wanted to let people know that he had been subjected to some form of medical torture by the Russian government, or what he took to be medical torture by the Russian government. There was something about the use of that phrase, hundreds of injections, that was like, it's one of the most chilling, because it's new. I mean, we know that they threw people, the Soviets threw people in psychiatric prisons. We're hearing horrible details about the torture of the Gazan captives. But all of that is kind of in the realm of what we know about governments and tortures and terrorists and tortures. A prisoner, a fake prisoner of Russia, who is not a spy, and they knew at some point pretty early he wasn't a spy, and they're still injecting him with whatever it is they're injecting him with. that's, like a detail out of a nightmarish, Kafka novel about what happens in prisons to innocent people. And Trump got him out. I mean, so that was also the news yesterday.
I mean, I think on the sort of most basic level, Trump's success so far is reminding people that the president can do things. Anything.
It's a low bar, right?
But that was the bar.
But he's clearing
it. For 4 years of a president who really didn't do anything.
Can take interviews, can come up with bold new policies that may or may not work. Can meet and talk extemporaneously, for stretches of time. It's and it's like the country needed to remember, because we were on autopilot for 4 years. The images of Biden were, he was walking on the beach with his wife and
or asleep on the beach,
falling off his bicycle,
also
tripping on a cable.
Trump himself was in a different place 2016 through 2020 as well. So this was bogged down by the Russia stuff, and totally everything was totally new to him. He was feeling his way around in the dark. He was hiring people he didn't know who or what, how to navigate, the DC, the whole system and whatever. So in a lot of ways, this is like Trump sort of doing a do-over, not even a second term, but like a kind of do-over for that. We didn't really have Trump feeling this way, acting this confident.
The greatest thing.
And knowing, and coming in with a plan that he could put into place then too. So it kind of has been a while since a president came in with a playbook and said, all right, first down, let's go.
And it wouldn't have looked like this had he won in 2020, right? This wouldn't have been the Trump presidency at all.
So there were two examples of this. So you said he came in with a playbook. Biden came in with no playbook. That was part of his promise to the American people. He was gonna build on, though he didn't put it this way, the successes of Operation Warp Speed and the efforts to get COVID, to sort of rid the country of COVID or deal with the COVID crisis. But he did not have an agenda. And then they had this fabled meeting in the White House with, John Meacham, and the historians informing him that he had a chance to be FDR. And he was like, I've heard of FDR, good. And then suddenly $6 trillion are going out the door, creating a massive inflationary spiral, or being a part of a massive inflationary spiral, to no good other economic effect, including getting us out of recession and stuff like that. So Biden came in literally running as I don't have an agenda. I'm normalcy. Like, I'm just going to manage things. And then he seized on one in March or April. Trump started in 2017 as the least experienced person ever to occupy the presidency. And he comes into this second presidency, which is a new presidency. It's not an extension of the old presidency, as the most experienced person ever to be president. If you look at this as he is Trump 47, not Trump 45. And he was president for 4 years, and then he had 4 years to ruminate or reflect on, not that he's a big ruminant or reflector, on what he might have done wrong or how he might do things differently. And he came into office as the most experienced person ever to come into the Oval Office. That's an amazing difference, and particularly since it plays to his marketing strengths. He is marketing himself also as the president, and what he is doing is setting himself up in this contrast to the senescent, somnolent person who was occupying the office, at least for the 2 years, for 2003, 2004, when the decline was really pronounced. It's not as though Biden didn't do stuff in 2001 and 2002, or his administration did. They did plenty of stuff. People didn't like it, was ineffective. But they passed these 3 or 4 giant pieces of legislation, and then he really did, fall off a cliff. So Trump knows how to market himself and knows how to market. That's his sweet spot, and he is really, honestly, I'm not a big fan of his. He's doing a brilliant job in that regard. And why should he listen? I mean, it's not as though this conversation about him is anywhere that there's a middle ground.
Well, another example of the hysterical reaction to what has been a pretty remarkable 3 weeks in office was, as you know, we had a constitutional crisis this week because the district court judges in New York and Rhode Island have trying to freeze some of Trump's executive orders. And apparently this leads the legal profession to assume that Donald Trump has disobeyed the Supreme Court of the United States, which has not ruled on any of these questions that are being litigated. But in the midst of the standing for Elon Musk sitting press conference with President Trump yesterday, someone asked, "Mr. President, would you obey the courts?" And he said, "I always obey the courts. I appeal it. And that's unfortunate because that will give people some more time to do bad stuff in the bureaucracy. But yes, I obey the courts." And thus ended the constitutional crisis of 2025 because there's no evidence that he's actively disobeying the courts, much less the Supreme Court, which is typically, that's when people talk about a constitutional conflict or, high stakes constitutional moment, when Andrew Jackson says that Justice Marshall has made his decision, let him enforce it.
Right.
Yeah. Or Justice Marshall has to figure out a way to rule in Marbury v. Madison that retains his power and yet doesn't invite any real retaliation from Jefferson. Or I don't know, when Joe Biden's idol decided, these 9 old men have been resisting my agenda, so I'm going to expand it and put in people that are loyal to me so that we can authorize a second New Deal. Those are typically what you think of when you think of constitutional crises.
Can I mention
the judge saying to Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary of the United States, that he can't look at an invoice.
Yeah. Well, can I mention one thing? Because someone reminded me of this and I had totally forgotten about it. There was this famous secret bombing of Cambodia in 1970, 1971. And the most liberal member of the Supreme Court, the most liberal justice on the Supreme Court, was William O. Douglas, who was by this point senile, by the way, or is thought he went senile. I'm not sure if he was yet fully senile. He was another one of the kind of, Edith, like his wife was kind of running his very young wife was running his office. And Marshall Douglas, issued a proclamation that Nixon had to stop bombing Cambodia. Friday night, just like, this bombing is illegal, he must stop. And then, like, Monday morning, the entire Supreme Court met and said, don't listen to him. It's okay. It's fine. So that was 55 years ago. That was like, it's not as though even the Supreme Court is somehow, it is not the case that the Supreme Court, individual justices can be off their meds,
4 weeks ago, President Biden invented a constitutional amendment.
Yeah. By tweet.
Here's what I love, that suddenly the Democrats are championing the judiciary. Like, didn't we go through this whole thing about how they need new ethics rules? We need more justices.
We need to change the composition of the court.
Yeah. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said
court is illegitimate.
In 2023 that Biden should ignore the Supreme Court. She was on TV. She was on, I don't know, Simone Sanders' show or whatever, like, lunatic asylum show is on Saturday mornings, when they let the inmates at the asylum of Charenton stage Marat Saad, she said he should ignore the Supreme Court. That was a completely legitimate. Sheldon White House said the Supreme Court is a rogue court.
Right.
Chuck Schumer is calling on people effectively to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh. Yeah, you will reap the whirlwind. I mean,
the
I
Democratic
don't mind any of that.
The Judicial Committee chair in the House, the Democratic Judicial Committee chair, sponsored a piece of legislation to expand the court.
Right. I don't have a problem with that kind of, honestly, I don't have a problem with that kind of runaway rhetoric. This is the world we live in. That was a kind of conventional position among Democrats, just as when courts do things that conservatives think are outrageous, as was the case, let's say, with the Casey decision in 1992, was it? That was the real effort to have the court overthrow Roe v. Wade, and the court refused to do so. And people that I have great respect for and had great respect for at the time were so disheartened that they believed that this decision rendered the American polity illegitimate. There was a huge symposium in First Things magazine in 1995, 1996 about the legitimacy of the American regime, because it had enshrined this constitutional right to abortion. This effort had been made to make this argument that abortion was murder and was not, and that the Roe was a constitutional atrocity, and it had failed. And that was what people were waiting for, to assure them, if they were people who believed that abortion was, the new slavery, and that the sweet reason would win out, and it didn't. And so that was a serious argument, and like people quit First Things because they didn't want to have this. This is all fine with me. They're the ones who are saying that you're not allowed to say that the court that maybe we shouldn't. If you're J.D. Vance, maybe we shouldn't abide by court's decisions if they're illegitimate. Now, he shouldn't have said that. Trump shows he shouldn't have said it, since Trump is the one who had to clean up J.D. Vance's mess here. That's not the way this is supposed to work, right? Trump is not the one who was supposed to, it's sort of an unforced error to say, well, we don't really have to abide by courts if they say things we don't like. A dumb move. Vance has not been dumb. We can talk a little bit about Vance in a minute. But, as I say, they're the ones who are creating the standard according which it's okay for them to say the courts are illegitimate. It's just not okay for people, on the other side to say that. I say everyone's allowed to say whatever they want. You're allowed to say that's part of what it means to have a political and ideological argument in the United States. Right. They're allowed to say Trump is Hitler.
Agrees with you, John. And then this is why I brought up the 70% number, because there's a 70% said, yeah, he campaigned on this. We expected him to do this. He campaigned on this, then he won an election fair and square, and now he's doing it. And 53% approve of what he's doing. There's a gap between those who think what he's doing is legitimate and those who approve of the actual policies. The 70% is a legitimacy vote. That is an overwhelming majority who say, yeah, what he's doing is legit. I don't necessarily like it, but that's what he needs. And that's what's stifling the Democrats, is not just that a lot of the policies, some of the policies are popular. I mean, we saw the returns on the polls on, mass deportation and some of the things that he ran on. But the general perception among the public is that he said, if you elect me, I'm going to do this. Then he won an election fair and square. Now he's doing it. And the legitimacy argument is completely evading the Democrats in a way it didn't last time.
Right. I just one more comment about constitutional crisis, since I wasn't on the show yesterday. Constitutional crisis is the new protect our democracy. And we went through 4 years of Biden and the Democrats saying that Trump was a threat to democracy. We have to protect democracy. And then when we got the exit poll in the 2024 election, and we saw who did better on the issue of democracy, it was Trump. So I just caution the left to not go over their skis here with constitutional crisis. Before you know it, people are going to start saying, well, Trump is protecting the Constitution. Or maybe they're going to focus on what these district court judges. There was a big issue with nationwide injunctions from district court judges in the first Trump term, and then Biden had to face it during his term. If anyone had a little bit of dispassion or detachment here, they would recognize that a judge in New York, a district court judge in New York, in the middle of the night in an ex parte decision, which means he didn't even hear the government's argument, to say that, no, the only people with access to the Treasury system should be the permanent bureaucrats who no one has elected. That's insane. That's a total overextension and abuse of the judicial power.
Look, I'm glad you said that they're getting out over their skis, because this is what I mean when I say everybody should be able to say whatever it is they want to say. That's the world in which we have gotten to the point where the idea is you shouldn't say that is a legitimate way to conduct a political argument. Is one that we just lived through to our incredible detriment. Let people say that Trump is Hitler. I'll give you an example, because Trump is gifted with his enemies. His enemies, he drives people so crazy that he drives them to destroy themselves. That's why, Matt, your caution is right to them. Like, keep your powder dry. Don't go crazy. You've got 4 years of this fighting. If you go to Hitler in 2 weeks, if you go to the Reichstag fire and it's 1932 and I don't know who Hindenburg is in this scenario, because Trump is Hindenburg and Hitler, apparently, both combined. If you go to this, where are you going in April? Where are you going when there actually might be a moment at which Trump is really tempted to defy the will of the Supreme Court or something? You've already said he did it already. So, and then, you have stuff like this amazing thing that appeared in the American Prospect by Robert Kuttner, February 10th, 2025. What Trump could learn from Hitler on NIH funding. Subhead, even the Fuhrer knew to support German science. And not just for war.
This
Why
is an
is
article
Trump trying to destroy America's great research universities? Now, Robert Kuttner is famously known, co-founder of the American Prospect, and unfortunately for people at Brandeis University, a professor at Brandeis University, was known during his days as a columnist for the LA Times as Crazy Bob. So, Crazy Bob is apparently resurfaced in this. But what I'm saying is, good. Congratulations, Donald Trump. Your enemies are helping you. They don't even know that they're helping you, and we know they should.
So hold on, I'm still trying. I'm sorry, you got me distracted by Bob Kuttner here. Yeah. You're saying that what he thinks that Trump shouldn't cut the NIH because Hitler was for government-funded research. That's his argument.
Yeah, Mengele. That was right. He was very supportive of twin experimentation programs.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, this is why the left has spent the last 10 or 15 years on campuses, in elites, all of that, working to silence the opinions of people with whom they disagree, rather than engaging, and they are losing the power of engagement that I have to say, never had the opportunity to escape because of the monoculture that we are not really a part of and that we try to fight, and they are at 6s and 7s. I mean, the Atlantic sound like lunatics. Can Trump hire a guy to go look at the books at USAID? Of course he can. Is it bad that the guy is like one of the most brilliant businessmen the world has ever seen? Yeah, it's terrible. That's awful. What a terrible, what we really need is some professor at Brandeis who thinks that Hitler had a real good idea there with the German, universities.
Well, but that's all connected because Elon Musk, because he owns Twitter and because he participates in the discourse on Twitter every 30 seconds or so. What you have here, the combination is you have like a bully pulpit, unseen. Yeah. I don't know when, because yesterday Musk is in the Oval Office taking questions.
Yeah.
And then he'll go on Twitter and he'll be
an observation about that, though. Taking questions in the Oval Office. I think it was very important that Musk was standing and Trump was at the desk.
Yeah,
because I think for someone who thinks in images like President Trump, he wanted the image of him at the president's desk and Musk having to stand with the other aides, even though he has such a megaphone and such an important role, it seems.
With his son
right
on his shoulders.
I'm not sure President Trump wanted the son in the Oval Office.
Right, and I've
seen some pictures of him where his look on his face was not.
Stephen Miller, who, as I said, was standing over Musk's shoulder, did not look happy. And the thing about Musk is, this is very much a work in progress, and it's very instructive to me, Musk's role on Twitter right now and what he's doing and SpaceX and everything else. Because if you ever needed evidence that Twitter is bad for the soul and the spirit, it is Musk on Twitter. Musk is a 53-year-old man who is potentially building a world historical legacy. And he's going on there, he's changing his name to HARRYBOLS so that people will have to say that on television.
Remember, he's spending most of his days now with 20-year-olds.
Well, that's true, but even a 20-year-old,
that's humor is running
old joke. That's like, the Yalu River by I.P. Freely. That's the level of joke that is. And his this evidence of the dopamine problem created by Twitter is right there in front of you in Musk's inability to stay off Twitter. I know it's probably not an inability. He thinks it's a superpower or whatever, but you can see that he can't help himself. And it's not just that he tweets things, it's that he's responding to tweets and saying, this is terrible and that person's crazy. And then he's attacking Sam Altman, the head of Open, calling him a swindler and stuff like that. And it's boy, do you have bigger fish to fry. I don't really know why, but he can't, it's too fun for him, which of course is the great secret of social media that people never talk about. Oh, it's so bad. It's this and that. It's fun. That's the crisis of social media, is that it's a form of very easily accessed fun that can, sort of take over your brain. And so, and it's interesting because J.D. Vance, aforementioned, in Europe, made this very interesting speech about AI, in which he took made a welcome ideological shift in broad measure, as far as I'm concerned, but maybe in exactly the wrong direction, which is, he said, we are not going to not only are we not going to quash AI with regulations the way Europe is, we are going to be the world leaders in AI. This is going to be a revolutionary, transformative, industrial economic engine for our time. We need to be sure that the Chinese don't run things, and the way Europe is doing this is terrible. We need innovation. We need transformation. We need to lead. If only he believed this about other aspects of the economy, instead of becoming a postulant of and an expositor of this American compass. I can't remember the terms they use here, but the idea that the social good means that you should interfere in the workings of the free market to direct the economy toward more moral goals. And apparently AI is the one major force that he is willing to be somewhat libertarian about. Abe, how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I look, I have a whole slew of misgivings about AI that I mentioned in my daily newsletter yesterday, but I actually think he's right, because
which you should subscribe to, which you can and should subscribe to at commentary.org.
Should subscribe. Yes, thank you, Seth. But I think he's right, because it's here and we have to come out ahead. Namely, we have to beat the Chinese here.
Right.
My misgivings about AI would be exemplified by a Chinese AI monolith. If they came out ahead of everything. So, yeah.
I agree with you there. I just think it's an interesting irony that that this untested technology that raises all these moral qualms and dilemmas, and also raises all kinds of questions about future employment in the tens of millions, things that can be replaced by this machine. Which, and if they can be, then they need to be, because they will be one way or the other if the technology is there. And it just means if we do it slow, Europe is, the point of his speech is that Europe may be consigning itself to a century of sort of Japanese sclerosis, with its inability to move quickly, which is what happened with Japan's industrial policy, its top-down economy in the 90s, as everybody else got much more fleet-footed and was able to transition to free markets and moving people around and having a more dynamic economic system. It's just that it's interesting to hear it come out of his mouth. We published a very good piece about this, about the Chinese AI threat, by Arthur Herman last year, that I commend to people. Just Google Commentary Magazine, Arthur Herman and AI, and you'll find the piece very easily. And that's really the case he makes, is that we have no choice, because the Chinese will be totally unethical.
But I mean, also, I think
in their use of AI, and we at least are constrained by the invisible hand.
But I also think Vance had to come out with this position because Trump had already sort of convened this big AI push. This
right.
This
oh no, I'm not saying. It's just that he decided to make it the subject of his first major speech on a foreign trip abroad, which is an interesting, by the way, fact that he is abroad this week, and because he is kind of needed. Like, he's probably not needed, but there are confirmations going on, and they're probably fine. But I'm not sure it's the most salient thing for him to be out if he wants Tulsi Gabbard to get confirmed. It looks like she'll be confirmed, so maybe I'm being silly, but it is kind of a weird week. Like, not to. There was an interesting, somebody who worked on Kamala Harris's staff was interviewed about this and said, her travel in that first two was incredibly curtailed, because they had a 50-50 Congress, Senate, and so she really had to be near. She couldn't go anywhere, because who knew when she would be needed to go on the floor and cast a tie-breaking vote. So poor Kamala couldn't be in Ghana like Karen Bass during a fire or something. Okay, well, I don't have a recommend. Anybody have a recommendation? Nah. All right. No. We'll be back tomorrow. So for Matt, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.